Okay, hello again. So this is the second screencast that's in place of our meeting in person on this Wednesday, which again is Independence Day. It's a university holiday. There's no class. Um, what I want to focus on now is talking about how to document and submit your projects. Um, I'm going to start with, I guess, the handout. No, here's what I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with talking about a tool called Javadoc. So let me go back to IntelliJ here. Um, okay, so you've probably noticed, and actually I'm going to go back to that student project that I used instead. I'll just use the same window. I don't think I'm going to need the phone bill right now. Okay, so as you'll recall, um, last week we talked about this student archetype is that Project Zero that I used to use a million years ago, and now I use it as a demonstration because it's a lot like your Project One. It's got sort of the same the same concepts, a lot of the same concepts, but instead it's a little toy program that I can use for demonstration purposes. Last week we looked at a lot of the code. Now I want to look at something else. I want to look at the comments associated with it. So in Java, there is a special comment syntax that's where you have a comment that begins with slash star star and ends with star slash, which is called an API comment or API documentation. The idea here is that these comments are meant to describe the program element that they immediately precede. So for instance, this comment right here describes the student class, which is declared right after it. Similarly, this comment right here describes the student constructor. And there are special tags that you can put inside the comment to describe further program elements. So like, for instance, here, the name parameter for the constructor is described by @param_name. And so then what this allows you to do is provide documentation in a standard format using a standard syntax for your program elements. And this is very helpful for anybody who's looking at your source code. Moreover, there's a tool that Java provides in the JDK called Javadoc that will generate HTML documentation for these classes. So I'm going to go over to the command line now, and I've got my student. I'm going to quick clean up my environment because I've been doing some stuff here. And I am going to run a Maven command, Maven goal called Javadoc. And what this will do is it'll analyze the source code for the project, and it will generate that nice looking HTML API documentation from the comments that are there in my source code. And as you can see, it generates all sorts of good stuff inside this target site API docs directory. So I'll just open that up here in my web browser, API docs. I think there's index.html, right? Yes, I'll just open that up. Okay, here's what I get. It's the package summary. I've got one package, as you'll recall. It's got one class in it. Very simple stuff, right? But this is what it creates. So I can just click on my student class here. And now let's compare and contrast what I see here in the generated documentation, what's there in the source code. So here I've got class student. It's there in this package. By the way, this is a hyperlink back to that page we just were. Hyperlink. Wow, that sounds like 1995 speak. But anyway, gee, I wonder why. It's got the class hierarchy. I'll come back to that. But more importantly, you can see that you've got a description of the class right here. So this class represents a student. If we go back to IntelliJ, it's the same thing that's up here. This class represents a student. And note that the student here is in this code tag, which creates a fixed width font for the class here. So it just makes it look like it's a Java class, something special and computery. The Javadoc also lists the fields that it has oh, and this is a field that's inherited from the superclass. We'll get to that in a moment. But it also generates information about the constructor. Again, that's taken directly from those API comments. So here, the description of the constructor is creates a new student. That's output right here, and here you've got all of the parameters. So this is really nice for the author of code that is meant for someone else to consume. Let's say you're writing a library, or you're writing some piece of open source software. There's an API that you interact with. This is how you can document your API for anybody else to use it. I've got the Javadoc command set up so that it'll link off to other documentation. So for instance, the superclass of student here is human. If I click on human, this brings me off to the API docs that I have published for my code, right? So this is in that edu pdx cs14j lang package, which is actually off, which is not part of this source code, the student source code. It's part of my source code, and I publish the API docs for my source code up on a GitHub page. Here is where you can then learn about the API documentation here. Again, since this is example code, it's pretty thin. Let's go someplace more interesting, like Javalang object. So now I can link off to here. This is off on Oracle's website. Oops. And here's all sorts of information about object. And so, the nice thing here is that it's all integrated. So, do you really, care that this is from Javalang? Well, yeah, sure, you need to know that, I guess, but you can navigate to it really easily. And here's some more interesting API documentation, right? It talks about like Git class, which I think some of you saw in the, well, actually, you'll all see it in the cones eventually. And when you watch the reflection lecture, you'll see that. And this is just a good way to explore the API, to learn all about it, is here through the API documentation. You can also, so this is looking at the API documentation for a single class. You can also look, you can click on frames here, and this will let you see all sorts of stuff. So this week you're learning about stuff in the Javadoc package, which I'm not seeing here. Oops. Javadoc. Oh, interesting. Yeah, they rearranged stuff. So I guess the easiest way is that you can search now. Yay! So if I want to learn about an array list, if I want to spell it correct, I just want, here we go, Javadoc array list. Oh, yeah. I can now find this stuff really easily. And this is where you can learn about all of these things. You see, there's lots and lots of documentation here that'll explain how to use it. It also has links off to other information here in a package summary, etc., etc. So for me, this is, I think, the best way to really learn about and explore all of these APIs, right? I mean, there are so many APIs now. Oh, we have modules now starting in Java 9, and well, I'm not going to talk about that now, but there's all sorts of neat stuff there. Like, oh yeah, Java Base. I think that's where all of this stuff resides now. Interesting. Oh, yeah, there's array list. So anyway, but you know what? Search is your friend. So if you're looking for a particular API, just search for it here. So let's see here. So that's API documentation. Those are Java docs, and it's an important, an API documentation is an important part of this class. So let me go back to the handout now that talks more about the requirements for documenting your code. So especially when you're earlier in your career, it's very important to be able to communicate what you've done and what you know. There's a couple of reasons for doing this. There's what's in it for you, and there's what's in it for the people around you. What's in it for the people around you is that it helps them understand what's in your head, what you're thinking about when you're explaining your code, when you are talking about what you've written, why you've written it. Yes, you can certainly express it there in code, and ultimately, that's the source of truth. That's what you've written. But it also helps to be able to explain it in words, explain it in English. And so then um, it helps you convey your design, demonstrate that it's well thought out, and it helps you sort of get it right the first time because you can reason about it in a natural language. It also helps people consume your code. Let's say you wrote some code and then, some weeks later someone else needs to come in and modify it. And that person could also be you. It helps to have sort of a paper trail. It helps to have an explanation of the context in which your code was written. So one of the things that I want you to experience in this course, before I get to that, there's also what's in it for you. For someone who's earlier in their career, let's be honest, part of what you need to do is establish yourself. You need to demonstrate that, yes, you know what you know and that there's stuff that you can do. And sure, writing code that is solid, that is well tested, that's easy to understand is important. And part of that communication that comes with the code is having good documentation. So not only just API documentation, but also good variable names, good method names, things that sort of make sense. So these are important skills to have for a professional software developer. And I know from my own experience, it was important for me when I was earlier in my career to be able to demonstrate and communicate all of these concepts. So because of that, I want you to use two mechanisms to document your code as you write it and before you really dive in. So the first mechanism is called the plan of attack. So every one of your projects, except for the cones, is going to have, you'll be required to submit what's called a POA, a plan of attack. And this is simply a design document that conveys in a couple of paragraphs what it is your program does and how it goes about doing it. Just roughly sort of tell me the story of what your project's going to do. Now, I don't want diagrams. I don't want fancy UML or animations or anything like that. Nope. I just want some text. So send me an email with some text in it. Please don't attach things like Word documents. Don't attach text documents either. Just write it in the body of an email and send it to me. The POA is important. It's worth 1 point of your project grade. So if you go and look at the project assignments, you'll note there's a little footnote at the end that says, hey, this is out of 7 points. 6 of them are for the project, 1 of them is for the POA. The POA is due 3 days or 72 hours before the project is due. So if it's the projects are all due on Wednesday night, this means that the Sunday night before it's due, you need to get your POAs in. And so please email them to me. With letters POA in the subject. I use email filters to filter all these out into a folder so that I can grade them all at once. And so if you've got something important to tell me, please don't put the letters POA in the title because I'm not going to see it for a couple of days. The POA is not subject to late days. So even if you end up using a couple late days on the project, nope, you still got to get your POA in early. Now, the whole reason for having it due 3 days before is that it's a forcing function. It forces you to think about your project and start working on it a couple days before it's due. So this is my way of helping you not start until the last minute on your projects. So that's the plan of attack. The other component of documentation is documentation that's in the code, that's closer to the code itself. As I said, Java has these really great tools for documentation, and I want you to leverage them in this class. And so then there is a requirement that you have a Javadoc comment for every class and method that you write. So you don't need document fields, but every class and every method. And so I reserve the right to deduct up to 1 point from an assignment that I deem is not well documented. So one of the test cases that I put all of your code through is one that goes and generates some API documentation, and I go and I look at it, and actually it's not I'll have the graders go and look at it and assess whether or not it's complete, it's up to snuff. And so I would like you to make use of the Javadoc tags that are provided to you, things like the @param and @return and @throws. There's a lot of tools that are available to you. I want you to learn about them, and so it's part of your assignment, it's part of the course. You can find out more information about Javadoc at that URL. Um, I also encourage you to check out the what's sort of become the standard Java coding conventions at that style guide right there that Google has put together. It's based on sort of an evolution of the original style guides that Sun put together back in the day. So it's got good pedigree, and you'll see that I follow it, I think, for the most part. Um, and what but by understanding the style guide and by adhering to it, it makes your code more readable to other people. So there's think of it as everybody. There are lots of there are think of it as like spoken language and dialects, right? So I mean, there's lots of people all over the world who speak the English language, but there are different colloquialisms. There are different uses of the same words in English that might mean different things, or one person from one part of the world might use a phrase that might make no sense or have a completely different meaning to someone else. The style guide. But imagine if there was sort of a style guide that explained all these colloquialisms, or that encouraged everybody to use sort of a common set of vernacular. That's what the style guide does. And so if you read this and understand it, you'll be able to read and understand other people's Java code, and then also if you follow it, your code will be more readable by other people. So definitely use Javadocs and learn about and adhere to the standard Java coding conventions. And finally, in addition to the plan of attack, which really talks about the how of the project, I want all the projects to have a -readme object, that option that prints a small paragraph of a couple of sentences. Textual description of what your project does. Here again, it's important to be able to summarize what your code does, what your project does, in a handful of words, a couple of sentences. So every project assignment, every command line project assignment has a -readme option, and when the -readme option is present, all your program should do is print the -readme and exit. So it shouldn't do any other additional error checking on the command line. It shouldn't try to perform any other operations, create phone bills and phone calls. Nope, shouldn't do any of that. Just print the README and exit. Oh, and note it's important that the README is hard coded into your program. It's there in Java. You can't submit text files, and so you have to have that README there in your source code. So just to reiterate, there are a couple components for documenting your code. There's the plan of attack. There's API documentation. There's following good coding conventions, which actually is something I'm not going to assess, but something that I highly recommend that you do. And then there's also the -readme, something I will assess because there will be a test on each one of your projects to take a look at the README. Before we leave documentation, there's one other thing I want to show you that Maven can do. So I'm going to get something running in the background, and I'm going to explain to you what it is. So if you've seen the Maven lecture, there is and actually I mentioned this in the assignment. There is a phase in Maven called Site. I'm just going to get that running in the background. Here's what Site does. So Maven is all about managing the build process for your projects. And as I mentioned in the lecture, there are all these various plugins to Maven that do things, that run tools against your source code. And whether this be the Java compiler or the thing that builds jar files, or as we saw, that builds a Javadoc, there's all sorts of plugins provided out there. There's a whole class of plugins that are all about documentation for your Java project. So this includes the Javadocs, but it includes lots of other tools also for running various kinds of analyses on your code. Things like looking for common errors in your source code. Things like documenting what software license your project uses. And all those tools, those tools that have Maven plugins can then be referenced as part of your Maven project. So, and when you run the site, goal, what it does is you can configure to run a lot of these reports and then generate a website for that. And so then if I use the Maven site stage, what that does is that makes all the HTML nice and easy to work with. So I'm going to open up now target staging student. Okay, so index.html. And so what this does is it creates this whole, I'm going to call it a website, series of HTML files here that describes the student project. Now, it's got a bunch of, I've configured to use a bunch of plugins that sort of provide this default information about the project. So project information, you can find out about what the dependencies are. So for instance, the student project depends on the examples jar that, contains the human class. And then these compile time dependencies, they also have dependencies for tests. So it uses things like JUnit and Hamcrest. And then this Maven plugin generates this report. It talks about all the transitive dependencies. So these dependencies depend on other projects, and it lets you see sort of the totality of here's all of the code that you need in order to run this project. This is pretty cool, and this allows you to sort of understand where all of your code comes from. It also tells you information about the various licenses involved. So for instance, this is by library. So, oh, look, JavaMail uses something called the Cuddle license. Okay, cool. JUnit uses Eclipse, etc., etc. Like my code uses Apache 2.0. So this is all very nice, and actually licenses are important. Hopefully you've learned about this or will learn about this in some of your other classes. But when you are using somebody else's code, they license that to you. There are agreements, legal agreements, that you agree to follow when you use somebody else's code. And as a professional programmer especially, it's really important that you understand these licenses, the ramifications, and are aware of which licenses that you're using. There are some licenses. I don't have any GPL. Well, I have GPL 2, which is okay. But there are some licenses that will require you to do things like, well, if you use this other code, this is open source. All of a sudden, your code must be open source. Otherwise, you're in violation of that license, and that's bad. Especially if you are part of a commercial operation that wants to sell your software to make money, and you've got intellectual property that you want to keep within the building. And then of course we can have holy wars over the pluses and minuses and benefits of open source software. But anyway, the point here is that this this report lets you see everything right here and lets you make decisions. All sorts of great stuff here. Anyway, I'll let you explore because I want to move on. But you can also have stuff like issue management, and here's a page that says, oh yeah, if you want to report an issue against this project, here's how you can do it, and it's off in GitHub here. Similarly, for source code management, I configured this Maven project to say that, oh yeah, it's all there in Git, and so here you can find the GitHub URL very easily. And there's also, what's the summary? Oh yeah, this provides information about this, like, oh, here's the organization. It doesn't have information about the author. Maybe I can go add that real quick. Because what I want to show you now is where all this information comes from. So all this information comes from the Pom XML that's here with my Maven project. So for instance, okay, yep, it has the name of the project, student project, and then that gets put here. Similarly with the description and the home page. So like, if I wanted to make this even spiffier, I'd say, well, the URL is really, it should really be like tilde Whitlock. Actually, and this is because it's mine. You can put your own URL in there. So the whole idea, and as you can see also, like all those dependencies also come from the, oh yeah, here we go, also come from the Maven Pom XML file. So these dependencies are not only used to build your source code, they can also be used by these reporting plugins to generate these reports so you can easily see where everything comes from. So this is a nice way of visualizing all of the project configuration for your project, and pretend that you're working on an open source project that has hundreds of people contributing to it. This information is very important for not only the people that are contributing to it, but also then the thousands or millions of people that are consuming the output of that project, that artifact that you're creating. So this stuff is cool, but what's even more cool is all these project reports that you can build. So there are all these reporting tools that you can that are for Java programs, and so you have things like your Javadoc. So here that links right off to, again, our API documentation. That's super nice. I also have it configured to build the Javadoc for the tests. This is something that you can do. I just wanted to see you can do it. And so now you can have a student test. This isn't terribly interesting because there's not a lot of stuff here. Although, look, here I have a link off to Hamcrest, stuff like that. So, that's something you can do. I don't know how valuable it really is. But here's some stuff that's more interesting. There are these tools that will allow you to do analysis on your onto your code. Sorry, one more thing on speaking of tests, there's also there are also some plugins that let you visualize the results of running your tests. So here, I've got I remember we have a unit test called student test. Maybe you don't, since we haven't talked about it. Student test. Here we have a student test. You've got all these guys. Well, as part of building the site, it ran the unit tests, and now you can see the results here in this report. So you can see, oh yeah, there were 6 tests that were run. None of them failed. You can go and drill into the details and see how long each one of them wrote. It'd be kind of nice if they had table headers here, but anyway, it lets you see all of this. For this very simple project, not terribly interesting. But you can see, like on my code, let's see if I can go back to that. This link does not work right now, but let me go back to the Javadoc, and we can very easily get to my, oops, what did I just do? My docs for my site. So this is all of my code. If we look at the project reports, well, let's just go into something interesting like the grader. Here we look at the project reports and we see, oh, I don't have Surefire stuff here. Okay. Sorry, that example is not going to work. But anyway, here you can see all of the outputs of your unit tests. Some other stuff that's interesting. So I've configured the projects to use something called spot bugs to oh, this is completely uninteresting. To do some analysis to that. Here, I'll come up with a better example. Sorry, this does some static analysis on your code and looks for smelly code. What have I got here? Oh, here's some stuff that's more interesting. What it does is that over the years, there's been this huge catalog of, like I said, code smells or things that might be error prone. Like, oh wow, look, this code might get a null pointer exception. Or, this code uses a deprecated API or an API that's known to have a race condition in it or something like that. And it will tell you all about it. So for instance, okay, I'll just choose a random class here. Here is my, my submit program. And it says, okay, look, there are, 5 bugs. And I put bugs in air quotes because they're not necessarily wrong. But it's saying, hey, you are relying on default encoding when you create an input stream reader. I don't expect you to know exactly what that is, but the whole idea is like, hey, someone along the way found bugs in this, or found that it was something a little tricky. Here's a warning about it, and so you can go off and learn then about this particular bug description, and it gives you more information. Like, oh yeah, okay, found a call to a method to perform a byte to string or turn a byte conversion, and it assumes a default platform encoding, which may or may not be the case. And this has caused problems for other people. So hey, by the way, we'll tell you about this. And so then, if you want to get an idea of some of the particularly some particular problems that other people have run into, some lessons learned over the years, and lessons learned the hard way, this Spot Bugs has a great database for that. What else is there? Oh, PMD. Okay, so these are not interesting. And the reason they're not interesting for the student is because they are so small. So PMD does, again, some static analysis and reports on things that might be a little smelly. So for instance, hey, I have a private field called reporter here that's never used. And I have some unused parameters here. And so then what it does is it lets me link off to the source code. And so now I can, sorry, what line was that? That was line 242. Oh yeah, right down here on 242. Yeah, I have parameters here in this constructor, and they're not used. Now, as it turns out, this is perfectly fine. So this is kind of just annoying, but it might find some real bugs. And I encourage you to experiment with these reports, to periodically build your Maven site and just see what these tools are telling you about the code that you're writing. Also has some other nice things about your project. This is a report that tells you if you've got any out-of-date dependencies. So let's say, oh, there's a new version of JUnit. Do you want to try it out? This will let you tell. Sorry, this will tell you about that. Right now, everything's clean because well, I ran this report before, it was a couple weeks ago, and I cleaned up all of my dependencies so that the source code that you're using is using only the latest and greatest stuff. Remember what JDepend is? Oh, this is just, okay, right. This does some cyclomatic complexity analysis and stuff that I guess is all explained here. You can go and link them off to other things in the report. It talks about like afferent coupling. Yay! Go off and read about that. Anyway, so the bottom line here is what I wanted to tell you is twofold. First of all, there are some very powerful reports that you can run really easily through Maven, and this is one of those this is one of those benefits of Maven. If you agree to do things the Maven way, put your source code in certain directories, follow certain conventions, deal with the Pom.xml and everything like that, you can get some really powerful reports really easily, sort of out of the box, or at least with minimal configuration. And then Maven allows you to bundle all of these reports into this site that can then be deployed out to places like GitHub really easily. I won't go into it in this screencast. I'll do a bonus screencast sometime later today that explains how you can do that. It's not really part of the course, but it's kind of a neat thing. And if you are working on a project for yourself, either something open source or maybe a capstone, or whatever, where you've got a project and want to leverage some of these tools, it's a neat thing to do. Because what you can then do is publish all of your documentation to one place, and everybody can see it. So, more bonus stuff about documentation. As you can see, I get a little too excited about these things, but I think you're getting used to that by now. Okay. Finally, well, actually not finally, nextly, how to submit your projects. Okay, so we've been talking about how to develop your projects, and I'll talk about how to submit them. I don't use D2L to submit your projects. I don't want you to email them to me directly. I don't use Dropbox. Gone are the days of giving your TA a floppy disk. Instead, what I did is I wanted to learn about this Java Mail API, and this was many, many years ago. So I developed a tool that lets you submit your source code. And what it does is it's command line utility, and you run it there next to your source code. It goes and takes the source code, it bundles it into a zip file, I guess, and attaches it to an email and sends that email off to the grader. This is one of the key tools that allows the course to scale so many students. So what I needed to do is I needed to standardize the process by which you guys submit your source code so that I can have the graders investing their time in assigning grades to like 60 students as opposed to spending hours, trying to figure out how to extract stuff from D2L and put it in just the right place and then compile it and blah, 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 blah. I want to automate that process as much as possible so that the graders can spend their brain power on assessing, not on trying to get not trying to run your programs. So here is all about the submit program. For those of you who have run the survey, it looks a lot the same. So from the CS department's machines, you run this command, which says, "Hey, run the Java virtual machine with and put this grader.jar on the class path and run the submit program." And when you do that, you see these. You'll see this information, which gives you some usage information. So there's some required information. There's the project name, so project 1, 2, or 3. This matters. It'll only let you submit. It needs to know which project you're submitting, and so it'll be again, 1, 2, 3, or I think the GWT one. No, even that is project 5. I want to know your name, know who's submitting it. I also want to know what your login ID is, and it must match the login ID that's there in your file names or your directory hierarchy. I want to know what your email is, and then I want one or more, actually it's a minimum of 3, I guess, files that you're actually going to submit. There are some options if you run into problems. If you do run into problems, though, please reach out to me on the Google community so I can help you with there. So, for project 1, it looks like I'm a little out of date. Sorry, I'm using the appointment example, which is from a different term. But instead, you can do something like, oops, I think I'm missing a Java in that. Boy, there are bugs all over the place in this guy tonight. So you would cd to your directory and run the command like this. So we project 1, I am me. I would give my ID. There's my, oops, I just clicked email. Sweet. Yeah, lame. There's my email, and I can include a comment if I want. That's cool. And then here are the 3 files that I'm submitting for project 1. Of course, yours will be project 1, your phone call, and your phone bill. And then what this will do is it'll go, it'll chug along there for a moment. It'll put together a zip file, mail it off to the grader, and actually you'll get a copy of it, I think, or at least you'll get a receipt email that says what it is that you submitted. And that's how you submit stuff. It's important to note that please submit all of your files in one invocation of the command line. Don't do them one at a time. Actually, you can't do it one at a time. And if you resubmit, that's not a big deal. Oftentimes it's like, okay, great, it's due on Wednesday, and so then, Wednesday morning, you get everything all ready, you submit it, and then you realize that, oh, wait, I missed a test case, and oh, there was a bug, and so you can go back and add it, submit it, later in the day, Wednesday afternoon before class or something like that. Not a big deal. The submit program will work just fine. Just, be mindful, however, that, not to submit too many times because it'll annoy the graders. So that's the submit program, another important tool for your projects. Okay, lastly, for this screencast, I want to talk about project 2. So in project 1, you did the fundamental things for your phone bill application. So you just created some classes, and your command line did some simple parsing, and then your program itself did nothing interesting. It was right. It just read some stuff from the command line, created a phone call, and printed out that phone call when the -print option is there. Not very interesting. Project 2 gets a little bit more interesting in that you're storing a phone bill in a text file now. So I want you to augment your project 1 with some new classes that exercise Java's facilities for doing I/O and for throwing exceptions. So I want you to add a class called TextDumper that dumps the context of a phone bill, so the phone bill, the customer name, all of its calls, to a text file. And this implements an interface that's one of in my classes called phone bill dumper. Similarly, there is a text parser that reads in the contents of a text file that was written from the dumper and creates a phone bill from it. So the whole idea is that you are translating a phone bill to text and then text back to a phone bill. This is all driven by a class called Project 2, which is the command line tool with a main method. And its basic cycle is that if you provide the right options, it will read a phone bill from a text file that's provided on the command line. We'll create a new phone call for that phone bill, add it to that phone bill, and then optionally write it back out to that text file. This is a superset of the functionality that's there in Project 1, meaning that all of the functionality, such that it is from Project 1, is still there and will still be tested on your command line utility, but now we've just added some new stuff. Particularly, note that all of the arguments are still the same, all of this information about creating a new phone call, but now there is a new option called text file, which specifies where the phone bill should be, the text file from which the phone bill should be read and written. Still have -print and still have -readme. Notice that the dates and times are still the same, and they are still two separate command line arguments. Okay, it's important to note, because people get tripped up on this all the time, that if the text file does not exist, so you run your program and the text file doesn't exist yet, that's perfectly okay. You should create a new phone bill and start from that. Add your new phone call, go from there. This is not an error, right? Just because the phone bill doesn't exist, it doesn't mean it's an error. There's got to be a way to bootstrap your file, and the way you bootstrap your file is that you go to add a phone call to a phone bill whose text file doesn't exist yet. So make sure to do it that way. And note that the format of the text file is completely up to you. So you can determine what you want your phone bill text file to look like. And note that all of the phone numbers, all of those other things, are just the same as in previous assignments. Note that you don't need to recreate the Maven project. You don't need to run the archetype again. I suppose you could if you really wanted to. Just copy in your phone call classes. But it's probably better just to add new functionality to your existing project. Oh, with regard to submitting, it's important that you submit all of your classes, even if you haven't modified them. So let's say, because like this, I don't believe this project will require you to modify your phone bill and phone call classes. There's really nothing new here, as far as that goes. So but please submit them anyway so that I have all of your classes there in one submission. I don't want to have to go find your classes from Project 1 to grade your Project 2. I'll just send you back a nastygram saying, hey, give me all your code. Points. Okay. So there's the dump method takes an abstract phone bill. And that's okay. Actually, did I, let me see. Let me go take a look at that real quick. I'm trying to remember. Let's see here. Phone, this is not this project. Well, actually, do I still have this? Phone bill dumper, I do. I can look at that. There, Okay, phone bill dumper has been parameterized to take a type T. So for fans of the previous screencast, you'll know all about that means. So this comment here, I need to update that comment. I need to update this whole thing to fix some stuff. Okay, error handling for your project 2. Again, I want a graceful exit. I don't want to see stack traces. Don't want to see error messages that make no sense. I want to see, so if it just prints out null, something's wrong, that would be bad. Make sure that your command line is that the command line provided is appropriate and healthy. including missing or extraneous command line arguments. Again, you're still checking the format of the day or time, but that hasn't changed. If your text file is malformatted, if there's something wrong there, you should issue as graceful an error as possible. And it's also an error if the customer name given on the command line is different than the one that's found in the text file. And that's it. So this is the next increment in the project. It's not super big necessarily, but remember, there's lots of work in progress that you need to manage. So I'm giving you this now before Project 1 is due. I recommend that you at least be starting to think about it. Oh yeah, and that POA is due the Sunday night before the project's due, which is July 18th. So whatever, 3 days before that, on the 15th, is when the POA is due. And that's that. So, this is probably the most important screencast to you guys because it talks about things that are required for your projects, like documentation and submitting, and of course, Project 2. You know, normally in class we have talked about pair programming, and you can watch the video and stuff. I still haven't figured out what I'm going to do about that. That room and those desks are just simply not conducive to pair programming, so I might skip that this term, which sucks. But it's the constraints that we're under. Maybe we can all take like oboe lessons instead or something. That would be painful. Yeah. Anyway, there are a couple other links that I suggest, including this one about continuous integration with Travis. And I want to get back to that, but I'm going to get back to that in another screencast here that I'll put together. Because that's, I think, something that's really cool and something that I want to expose you to. It's not something that I'm going to require for the class, but something that I want you to learn. So I'm going to finish up for right now, but I'll be back with a third screencast later in the day. Thanks a lot.